enlisted uniform on here. She has the WWII tunic as well as the WWII wool enlisted skirt. And you're wearing a cotton shirt underneath here as well as the women's version of a garrison cap. With the WWII piping here, it was the green and gold. And then we have a Class B enlisted uniform here, same as Sarah over here, but we have the wool shirt. You could wear the wool shirt and the cotton shirt interchangeably, as well as the wool skirt here. And she also has a hobby hat on. And then we have our two... Oh, and if you turn for me here, we are representing a Women's Army Corps recruiting center if you wanted to stop by over at our tent later on. So we have the WWII recruiter armband, and this is what would represent, or how the public would know that you are working as a WWII recruiter when you come into the office. And then we have our two WWII enrollees here who we successfully recruited into the Women's Army Corps today. And
I'm all set to go.
They'll go ahead and give you a little information about their clothing, if you can.
Okay. I am wearing a mid-40s sheer cotton day dress. I have a colored slip-on underneath of it. It's really nice for summer. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Mine's a suit, so if you look at original photos of new WWII recruits, women swearing into the Women's Army Corps, or just recruiting office photos, a lot of them dressed up in business clothes because this was a big interview. It was very difficult to get into the Women's Army Corps. You had to meet a whole litany of requirements to join. It was harder to become a private in the Women's Army Corps than it was to become a lieutenant in the man's army. So you wanted to present your best face, your best foot forward, your best outfit. So they really dressed up for their interview to prove that they were worth joining the Women's Army Corps, that they wanted to do their part for their country. So I tried to base it off of those photos. So my suit is an original from a department store. The tilt hat, the corded purse, and the toeless shoes are all very popular in 1944. I tried to base it as much off of the spring-summer 1944 fashions as possible. Oh, and we have, it's kind of hard to see when you guys are that far away, but we have our WWII enrollee pins. So these would signify that we have joined. We're not in uniform yet, but we have our first part saying that we are now in the Army. And you see these, again, in original photos, and there's a really great WWII account, An Army in Skirts by Frances DeBraw Brown. And she discusses being on the train to Fort Oglethorpe, the 3rd WWII Training Center, and they were able to identify each other by the pins on their outfits. And that way they all knew that they were in the Army together and they were headed to the same place.
And that's the Women's Army Corps.
Questions?
And then it's all over to you, boys.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
My name's Captain Moore. I'm with the 5th Rangers Dog Company. You'll see, well, we're basically all wearing the same thing here. 41 jackets. Our helmets are all the same. They're wearing HBT pants and Type 2 service shoes with the leggings. I have jump boots on, or as we call them, Ranger boots, because we didn't jump, and it's kind of stupid to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. So, Abe, can you step forward, please? Abe's pretty much how we're dressed, how we landed at D-Day in Normandy, at Dog White Beach, at Omaha Beach. Can you turn around, Abe? All the way, so they can see the pack. He's got the full pack. He has his extra pants, his shaving kit, the whole bit with him. His bayonet, his entrenching tools. Pretty much everything that they said the soldier needed to run up the beach. Now, okay, back in line. Staff Sergeant Crest, can you jump forward? After D-Day, this is pretty much what the soldier looked like. Only carried what he needed. His weapons, his ammo, and his canteen, and his first aid pouch. They decided that they really didn't need all the extra weight running up and down the beach and everything else. So as far as the clothing goes, wool shirts. For me, wool pants. They have the herringbone twill fatigue pants. We're all wearing 41 jackets. All M1 steel helmet pots. The only thing we have different are different weapons. Staff Sergeant Crest carries a Thompson. Go ahead, tell them about the Thompson.
Sure. So if you've heard of Tommy guns, this is the Army adapted version of that. Released in 1943. It's a machine gun, shoots 45s. They cost about $300 back in the day. They're unusually heavy and they jam all the time. It's a big sand trap. They're not actually very good, but they're really useful for what they are. So, for example, if I were attempting to hit that piece of stonework over there, it would be a challenge with this submachine gun, whereas an M1 would hit it every time. But if I'm as close as maybe me to you, I would hit you 100% of the time with a round that's almost guaranteed to be lethal. So it's a different weapon for a different purpose.
How many rounds does it hold?
That's a really good question. Okay, so originally Tommy guns had this big drum barrel on the bottom. Those hold 100, but the Army didn't like the concept of a guy wasting 100 rounds at once.
Plus the jams.
And it jams, and this is a really good story, but the Marines figured out very, very quickly that it becomes a big sandbox. So as soon as you let it hit sand, it immediately collects, jams, completely worthless. So the Army developed 2 stick magazines. This is a 30-round stick magazine for late war. For Normandy, they would have had a 20-round, which is slightly smaller than this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Edgar, step forward, please. Private Cardile, Port Arms. It's carrying a 1903 Springfield bolt action. These are usually used by rear echelon. Even though the Rangers weren't rear echelon, we would have a sniper that would have an 03 Springfield with a scope on it. It's a 30-06, 5-round magazine, very deadly. Even to this day, it's still one of the better rifles ever made. Let's step back in line. Abe, step forward again, please. Abe's carrying the M1 Garand. Still a 30-06 caliber, 8-round magazine. But this weapon caught all of our opponents off guard in World War II. Most people were using bolt actions. We were using a semi-automatic 8-round rifle. John Garand is probably one of the best rifle builders to this day. This, as General Patton said, this was the best infantry weapon ever made. Go ahead, fall back in line. And then everyone load up. I'm carrying, me as an officer, I have an M1A1 carbine. Mine's actually the paratrooper style. There it goes. Has detachable magazine. 10 and 15 round magazines for World War II. Later in Korea, Vietnam, they had more 30 caliber, but fired more of a beefed up pistol round. But a lot lighter than your M1 and your 03. We'll give you a demonstration a little. Edgar, come out here, fire into that traverse behind you. I asked the Russians to step aside. I want you to fire all 5 rounds as fast as you can. Go. Thank you. Dan, A. Fall out, aim at the traverse. After fire 5 shots. As fast as you guys can. Go. A lot faster. Staff Sergeant Kress, let loose with the Tommy. Now the only difference between the one Sergeant Kress just fired and back then is the one back then would have been full automatic. Unfortunately, to have a full automatic now, you pretty much is an act of God. Short of. And then there's the carbine. Never fired this before, it's new, so let's hope it works. Are there any questions?
How many magazines are you carrying with that M1?
As an officer, I would probably only carry 5 to 6 magazines at a time, because if I have to shoot, something really, really went wrong. I screwed up somewhere. That's why I have them. They do my fighting for me. But most of the time, I think on D-Day landing, if this was a normal stock, you'd have the 2 pouch on the stock, 1 in there, and then 2 more, so you'd have 5 magazines before you need to find someone to get ammo from.
It's on the grass.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Any more questions?
If I had seen that, I would have freaked out.
Oh, I totally forgot about it. Yes. This is a 45 Smith & Wesson model 1917 revolver. A lot of the older officers and sergeants still carried these in World War II left over from World War I. Basically, Connor, can you hold up and bring out your 45?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the 1911 Colt semi-automatic 45, which replaced these. But these were normally they were made to take the 45 long Colt. Well, the Army didn't want to have 2 different size bullets for everything. So what they did was adapted these little half moon clips for the 45 ACP rounds. So both mine and his fired the same rounds, and it can be fired single action or double. Yeah, all went off. But like I said, this 1917 Smith & Wesson, it's even still stamped on the bottom, United States property, but they got rid of them all. By the end of World War II, you hardly saw any of the 45 revolvers or the 38 revolvers. Everyone had switched over to the 1911 45. The gun hardly ever jams, as long as you clean it and maintain it right. This one really never jams, but you only get the 6 shots and it takes a little time to reload, whereas that one's just 1 magazine after the other. Are there any more questions? Okay, sir. De nada.
Yeah, I'm Chief Padruk Ugolev. That means I am Deputy Political Officer Ugolev of the Red Army of Workers and Peasants, later called the Soviet Army, for simplicity. Before we go on, I'd like to point out that 80% of the German army was deployed on the Eastern Front against us. Now I ask you, who won World War II? By the way, we call it the Great Patriotic War against Adolf Hitler. Okay, the watchword of the Soviet Army is simplicity. Everything we've got is simple as can be, because a lot of us are illiterate peasants, but we do the best we can. The Sergeant Blotnikov step forward and slowly turn around so they can see what you've got on your belt and everything. Okay, he's got a gas mask bag here. You don't need me to tell you that's a cup. Canteen. Okay, look, the backpack is nothing but a bag that's gathered together right here by a knot that won't allow it to flop open. Okay, he's got his entrenching tool, and okay, here's a grenade, F1 fragmentation grenade. It looks a little bit like the American grenade. I think the Americans copied off of the Russians. Okay, and okay, the pouch carries an extra drum for the. We call it a Pepe Shah. That's from our outfit. Actually, the full name is Podpuy Machpagin Sorok Adi, the PPSH model 1941. It carries a drum magazine that holds 71 rounds. We're not going to be shooting this because this is a demilitarized version. Okay, that's how it disassembles. And very effective when firing short bursts of 3 and 4 rounds from the stomach. Yes, go ahead.
What caliber does it fire?
7.62 millimeter. All our weapons are the same caliber. Now the difference is the pistol and the Pepe Shah, they use a short round, 7.62 by 25 millimeter. The other weapons, the machine guns and the rifles, 7.62 by 54 millimeter. Okay. All right. Milosevic, step forward. Okay, same thing, turn around slowly here. Private Milosevic. First of all, he's got a glass canteen. Now, you'd think that would break right off, wouldn't it? Well, it's really thick, tough glass. It probably will never break. Okay, keep coming around. Okay, trenching tool. He's carrying, you turn on around that. He's got cartridges for his Mosin Nagant 1891 rifle. This was a rifle made for the Tsar's army. It was modified in 1930 to be used by the Red Army. It carries a 5-round magazine, and his cartridge pouches are designed to hold 12 clips or 60 rounds. Okay, I don't know that we're going to make a big display here of how fast he can shoot, but if you want to fire a round into the, we like to save our ammunition to use against the Nazis.
Hurrah!
Come on, it's fine Russian quality. What are you talking about? You want to borrow the Springfield?
They just fucking threw him out of the boat.
Okay, basically it's the same kind of weapon as the 1903 Springfield. It's just our design instead of the American design. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, notice he's wearing a like a drop or bedroll across his chest there. That's his rain cape that can be rolled up and used. It can be worn like that. Can be unrolled to be used as a blanket. It can also be a body bag, and it can be buttoned together with several others to form a larger tent. Okay. Let's see. I guess about. By the way, we've all got jack boots on. It's more or less the same boots the Germans are wearing. Okay. And every Russian soldier is supposed to carry a spoon in his boots there. In fact, he was instructed to bring a spoon from home when he reported for induction. Okay. I'm wearing the early war uniform in which our rank was designated by combinations of triangles for non-commissioned officers, cubes were for lieutenants, rectangles were for majors on up, and then diamond shapes were for generals. Now, of course, we didn't have these kind of officer ranks early in the war. Everybody was just a commander. From a squad commander would be like a sergeant, to an army commander would be like a field marshal maybe. But we didn't like the word officer because it sounded too much like the Tsar's army of aristocrats that fought, before the October Revolution in 1917. After about halfway through the war, Stalin decreed that we would go back to a kind of an old-style uniform that has shoulder boards. Okay, the one broad red stripe there indicates Starship Sergeant, Senior Sergeant, and red stripes for non-commissioned officers, and then you'd have a combination of stars and stripes going this way for commissioned officers. And I'm carrying the, I wanted to talk about the iconic weapons of the Red Army, the weapons you always think of when you think of a Russian soldier. Okay, the model 1895 Nagant pistol. It's really a Belgian design, but it was adapted for use by the Tsar's army. You American cowboys, you're proud of your 6-shooters, right? Well, Russians, we have a 7-shooter. See, everything's better in the Soviet Union. So I'm carrying a middleweight cartridge.
Is that Captain?
I'm not going to waste a lot of ammunition for it either, but it's a double action, but you can't hit anything if you keep shooting like that. I always cock my piece for each individual shot. And let's see, what else? What have I left out here? Ask me some questions. Oh, one weapon we had that we didn't have one here with us to show you. The fourth iconic weapon of the Red Army is the 1910 Maxim machine gun. That's the one with the fat water jacket around the barrel. Now, one time we took these to an event someplace. Actually, I think it was here, but many years ago. About every third tourist that came by said, "Oh, look, they've got." Okay, what do you think they mistook it for? They thought, well, look, they've got a Gatling gun. Well, okay, it's not, but it looks like one. But of course, the Russian Maxim gun is distinctive because we had a little wheeled mount, the Sokolov mount, so it looks like a mini cannon. It does look like a cannon when you're dragging it along behind you. But Hiram Maxim was an American inventor who invented this gun way back around the turn of the century, actually. The American Congress wouldn't buy his design for the American Army, so he went to Europe and sold it to the British. They became their Vickers gun, actually. And then he sold it to the Germans. It became their Spandau. And then he even sold it to the Tsar, who called it the Pulemyot Maxima, or the machine gun Maxim of 1910. And we like to refer to it as the devil's paintbrush, because we could paint the attacking German line with red. However, unfortunately, we didn't have an example of that to show you today. Well, what questions can I answer for you?
Did you have med kits?
Yes, we used essentially the same mess bucket the Germans did, where you have, it's a bucket like this, it's slightly concave to fit into to the waist, and it has a cup that fits down over the top of it. So yeah, we did have mess kits, but they're just the same as the Germans essentially.
And there was also a more of a pail type too.
Oh yes.
It's just a basic pail with a handle on it.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just put that on top of the pack by its handle.
Now you answered about mess kits, but what about medical kits?
Oh, medical kit.
Yeah, that was
I misunderstood you.
both are good.
Well, I'm not a medical officer, so I can't tell you too much about that. We do have individual bandage rolls that we sometimes carry with us. All I'm hoping is that if I fall, I hope to go out gloriously for Comrade Stalin in the defeat of the German fascists. But I can't tell you anything about the medical. Any other questions? That's a good question, by the way.
I had a question about the soldiers. I heard or read somewhere that,
Who's talking to me? I can't see. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I heard or read somewhere that the Russians were so depleted or ill-equipped sometimes that they were 2 soldiers for 1 gun. Is that true?
That made a dramatic scene in that movie, Enemy at the Gates, didn't it? There were some instances in which there were more men than the rifles. That's true. That supply situation was more or less remedied by the time of Stalingrad. So that's sort of a Hollywood exaggeration.
By and large, the Soviets had enough weapons that they would actually supply the partisan units behind the German lines, very, very large, very organized partisan units. They would supply them with weapons and ammunition to disrupt the German rear. So yeah, there was plenty of weapons.
Oh, and I almost forgot to, we almost always had these with the bayonet fixed, okay? We didn't have an example of bayonet here with us today, but
long.
yeah, when you see the infantryman, he's almost always got his bayonet fixed. And it's a cruciform bayonet, meaning, and you look straight down, it looks like a cross. It's the same design, basically, the Russian army used against Napoleon in 1812. And it's a kind of weapon that when you stab somebody, instead of being a flat blade, which is fairly easy to sew up again, that cruciform blade, cross-shaped blade, creates a nasty wound that's very difficult to sew up and heal. Let's see, did I answer your question? Yeah, okay. Anything else? Yes?
During the Land Lease program, how did the Americans get like trucks and such over to the Soviet Union? Because kind of Germany was in the way.
Okay.
And Japan from the Pacific.
Yes. All our Lend-Lease things that we got from the United States had to come by convoy through the Arctic Ocean. Okay, and that's a whole epic story in of itself, the Arctic convoys, because when your ship goes down in the Arctic, you'd better be rescued very, very soon. Otherwise, you're dead. But yeah, that was the only way we could get stuff, basically. Anything else?
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've got one of those Nagant revolvers, and it's worth pointing out just how weird the cartridge is for that.
Yes, now I don't have any of those cartridges.
I
with
do.
me.
I
Okay.
fired them. The cartridge is longer than the cylinder. The bullet is countersunk about a 1/4 inch from the end. The entire cylinder moves forward to shove the cartridge into the back of the barrel. You've got a 14-pound trigger pull with single action, 21-pound with double action, and it never jams no matter what you do to it, and no one knows why.
Well, there you go.
Only revolver that you can
Put a
silence.
suppressor on.
Yeah,
He's
the
right.
cartridge actually looks like a blank. So you got to be very careful. And I'm not going to demonstrate that action of the cylinder because my piece is still loaded here and I don't want to mess around with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But any other questions? Let me say in closing, let me say this. The fighting on the Eastern Front was just extraordinarily desperate. Generally, prisoners were only kept long enough to get them to talk, and then they were often executed, every day of the war, 19,000 Slavs, that means either soldiers or civilians, died. Every day of the war. The Soviet army was destroyed 4 times and had to be completely rebuilt. The 5th Soviet army was the big one that got to Berlin. That's about all I can think to tell you. Anybody else? Any last questions? Very good. Do svidaniya.
You guys want to come up and take a look at anything? Be more than happy to.